George said I'm the Water Policy Advisor at the Planning and Conservation League. That's a Sacramento-based statewide organization, environmental organization. We protect the California Environmental Quality Act as one of our signature issues. Although I work for an environmental organization, I've also had a pretty long history developing water projects. I was the Deputy Director of the California Department of Water Resources. I was a County Water Agency Manager in Northern California. I chaired the State of California's Recycled Water Task Force as well as the State Desalination Task Force. I've been a negotiator for over $1 billion of water projects that have been permitted, financed, constructed, and are providing water service now. I was also relevant to your area, a key person, perhaps a catalyst, in the removal of the obsolete and unsafe San Clemente Dam. That started when I oversaw the California Safety of Dams Division, where that issue came to my attention. Let me give you a quick history of this issue at the PUC, and a little bit before. In 1995, the State Water Resource Control Board, they're the ones who give permits for the use of water. In 1995, they found that Cal-Am and its predecessor did not have water rights for most of the water they were diverting from the Carmel River. They were illegally diverting about 10,000 acre-feet of water annually. So what did they do? They're a state agency. They said, stop! The Carmel River at that time provided about 2/3 of water supply for the Monterey Peninsula. So the answer was, Not that the water board was really weak-kneed about this, but there was no viable alternative. You just don't shut off these communities from their water supply. So nothing was done. Then in about the year 2007, 3 alternatives emerged to replace those illegal diversions. One was something called aquifer storage and recovery. What that means is during periods of very high flow on the Carmel River, they did have the right to skim some of that water off and store it underground for use at other times. And that project has actually proceeded. A second project was something about water recycling, kind of an add-on after you do the big project, which was a desalination project. I was familiar with the contention that has existed in this region for, as Native Americans would say, almost since time immemorial. And while I saw the potential in those projects, I also recognized that these parties would require some incentives and disincentives to bring those projects to fruition. My office is about 1.5 blocks from the State Water Resource Control Board, so I walked down over and I said to the executive officer, well, it's time to start enforcing. You need to initiate a cease and desist order proceeding, which they did. And that resulted in that, it's sometimes called the CDO we hear about. That initial CDO had a deadline of 2016 for all of the illegal diversions to be eliminated. Now I'll give you all a lot of credit. Remember I said there's aquifer storage and recovery. There's another project I'll talk about. But something else that happened was your water efficiency, your conservation efforts. You all were probably the biggest part in bringing those illegal diversions down by being more efficient, more responsible in your water use. But at the same time, that wasn't going to be enough. So because Cal-Am is a regulated utility, it's investor-owned, as you know, what that means is you do not go to your local water department. If you live in the city of Marina, you do go to the Marina Coast Water District. But here you're served by an investor-owned utility, which means it is regulated by the PUC, California Public Utilities Commission on Van Ness, and if you have a problem, you go there. Well, no, actually, first you buy the special software that allows you to file papers to go there. Well, actually, you buy the software, you file the papers, it gets rejected 3 or 4 times. If you are a practicing attorney before the PUC, it'll be rejected 3 or 4 times because it's in the improper form. That's just a fact. But eventually, maybe you'll get to address them for 3 minutes sometime. So, what happened then? As we approached 2013, 2014, 2015, it became clear that these projects, particularly the Desalle, that one was not going to come online in time. People were trying, cut them some slack, and another project, remember there were 3, the Aquifer storage and recovery, the Desalle, and that little recycling thing on the side. And that was going to be a later phase, called phase 2 of the CPUC proceeding. Phase 1 was the Desalle plant. Phase 2, afterwards, if you need to make up a little bit more water, you go to the recycled water. Well, what happened? As we saw that the Desalle project was continuously delayed, the Plant Conservation League, where I work, we went back to the PUC, and then others joined, and we said, hey, let's flip the order of phase 2 and phase 1. Because it appears that the water recycling project can move ahead much quicker for about 3,500 acre-feet of water. Well, the PUC didn't know what to do with that, but after a while they said, well, okay, that sounds like maybe, and they allowed a hearing on that. And at the same time, PCL and others went back to that state water board and said, hey, the 2016 deadline ain't going to be made. But if you will amend that cease and desist order to give credit for the water recycling effort coming online, it still won't be online by 2016. That's showing good faith. If that thing can be under construction, cut them some slack. Cut you all some slack. Don't enforce the cutback. And the state water board said, well, if they can actually get it going, we will extend the schedule. And that was with the agreement of people such as ourselves who had initially initiated that cease and desist order, because we worry about the fish. That's our deal. And the state board did that, and well, I think it's now called Pure Water Monterey has gone ahead, and that project is under construction. But at the same time, other circumstances have changed with respect to the Desalle project. One of them, and I'll go over, I think, 5 of them, the cost for the Desalle project soared. The water recycling project, well, let's start where you are right now. Right now, it costs you, how many of you are ratepayers from Cal-Am? Okay, the cost to actually get the water, there's no fee from the state to take that water from the Carmel River. You're not paying any fee. Now, there is some cost to move it around. They have to pump it and move it, and that applies to any water supply. But right now, there's no cost for the source water. The recycled water is going to cost you about remember there's 3,500 acre feet? That's going to cost you about $2,000 an acre foot. There's a hefty increase, eh? I have a well where I live. So that's a pretty darn big increase. How much is Desalle? Our best estimate is it's $7,500 per acre foot. $7,500 per acre foot. And one thing about the Desalle plant, what if you all conserve? You continue to conserve and you conserve even more. You're still going to have to pay that. Because they're borrowing money on the market, they're building the facility, you're going to have to pay that in any event. So the cost differential, $7,500 versus the other. Something else we found out, and I sure as heck wish I'd known this in 2015, 2016. Remember I said we went to the water board and got them to extend it because there was some water recycling, and we thought the amount that was available at that time was 3,500 acre feet. Turns out there's even more water available. Also for $2,000 an acre foot. We didn't know that. If we'd known that, we would have asked the water board to accommodate that as well. But we didn't have that information. So, just here's a quick math question for you. How many acre feet were illegally diverted initially, back in 95? 10,000. With your conservation, with aquifer storage and recovery, with 3,500 acre feet from Pure Water Monterey under construction, what's left? 1,500 acre feet. That's all that's left. How much more water is available that we know of from Pure Water Monterey expansion? 2,250. 2,250 is greater than 1,500. That would allow the cease and desist order to entirely be met. It would allow the moratorium to be lifted, and probably you're going to find some more water. What else has changed? As was mentioned, the judges have been hearing this for 6 years. There are thousands and thousands of pages of transcript material for this. They issued their proposed decision yesterday. I've been doing this 40 years. I think they missed it. They are assuming, they accepted CalAM's contention that your water use is going to increase 50%. At the same time, they're adding $7,500 per acre foot to your water bill. Has anybody heard of a concept called price elasticity? You know, the more something costs, if it's high enough, people start cutting back. They gave no credit to that whatsoever. What's the last piece? And George Riley commented just a little bit on that. Our interest at the Planning Conservation League is to get full compliance with the cease and desist order. Sorry about your water bills. That's not particularly our issue. We are sensitive to it. But it's about the fish. And we want that order complied with as soon as possible. So we could say, hey, right on CPUC, you're going to make them do it. But as George mentioned, that ain't the end of the story. Folks in Marina, the city of Marina and the Marina Coast Water District have significant concerns that the operation of that desalination plant will draw in ocean water and contaminate their groundwater. Now, they're experts on both sides of that issue. I don't know which is right. I've read it. I'm not a geohydrologist, whatever. But what is important, from our perspective of compliance, is that, in my view, it's a 99% certainty that Marina Coast Water District and or the City of Marina are going to sue over the approval by the PUC, which delays it, which means CalAM cannot meet their schedule. Right? They would have to have everything fall in place exactly to meet the 2021 schedule right now. Any single small burp or hiccup, one, means they blow the schedule. So that is a concern to us. Why did the CPUC do this? Why did these judges, and they're smart guys, I've known one of them for 30 years, why did they come up with something that really bought CalAM's line, hook, line, and sinker? A couple reasons. The primary one is the great deference they give to the cease and desist orders. Now it's the 2021 deadline. Now that seems a ways off, but CalAM would still have to get a lot of important permits, like from the California Coastal Commission. They'd have to withstand any litigation. And by the way, you also have to build a facility. So they were very sensitive to that. They gave deference to a sister state agency, the State Water Board. We do not agree with the proposed decision. The CPUC, it works like this. The ALJs, administrative law judges, hear the case. It's quasi-judicial. There's testimony, cross-examination, rebuttal, sur-rebuttal, rules of evidence, and so forth. Then, eventually, as they did yesterday, they issue a proposed decision. That proposed decision then goes to the full commission for their decision, 5 members of the commission. In unusual circumstances, the commission members will actually have a special hearing before the hearing where they take action. They'll hear arguments, and that is scheduled for next week. That is only open to parties to the proceeding. Members of the public are not allowed. Parties each get 4 or 8 minutes to make their case. Then it goes to the commission, perhaps as early as September 13th, or later in September is another possibility. We are going to certainly provide oral argument as to why we think that's a flawed decision. What we think they need to do is have an additional hearing, literally a hearing, of this potential for Pure Water Monterey expansion to fully meet the 2021 deadline. By the way, at a lower cost, without litigation, without possibly endangering the city of Marina's water supply, avoiding all of that litigation. So that is what we are going to be advocating before the commissioners, that they need to do this. Now, again, their position is, oh, that's another delay or whatever. Planning and Conservation League, we want the CDO complied with as soon as possible for the fish. But going ahead right now and doing something that almost certainly leads to litigation and further delays is not a time savings. It is better to do it right, even if that means some slight delay, but we think, based on our experiences, what experience is that? That it can be accomplished in time? Remember, first it was phase 1, Desalle, then phase 2, water recycling. We got them switched in sequence. The recycling sailed through without dissent. Nobody objected. The Public Utilities Commission, the commissioners themselves, in virtually no time said, well, that's a good idea. Sure, go ahead and do that. So we believe that even if it takes them a while to get the evidence that they need, and you'll be hearing from folks from Pure Water Monterey about their scheduling, and I kind of trust people who are actually doing stuff. You know, they've got underway. It isn't like, we hope we can do this in time. That's what we think is the right outcome. We are parties to this proceeding. We cannot speak before the commissioners on September 13th. We will have already had our say. The rules are very explicit. The only people who can speak are people who are not parties. People who are parties, such as ourselves, Marina, One Water, and others, your group here, we cannot use you as the conduit for our positions. We can't advise you what to say at the commission. I can give you information about, I can tell you, and I think George has some material about what your rights are to address the commission, but you can tell them whatever you want, and that's democracy, and we like it. With that, perhaps we'd ask Paul to come up and describe, or George is going to do some more segueing for us, and then you can sound Paul out to see if he's the real deal or not, huh? Thank you.
I just want to call your attention to the little insert we have on a number of the seats. It has alert at the top. It simply says what your rights are as a citizen, and you have the right to pitch whatever. You have a right to pitch whatever opinion you have to the commissioners. What you have are email addresses for the commissioner. We have just a subject matter identified on this, but it's up to you to do however you want to. This is a great opportunity to make your notes of whatever you might want to say on this little slip, and then you take it home with you, and then you might want to do something. So that's just the alert for how you can get your opinion before the PUC. And it's important, if you do this, you really need to do this within the next few days if you expect to have any impact at all. Next we have is Paul Sciuto. He also has a lifetime of water experience, wastewater, pure water, various aspects of water. He's been our general manager of the Pure Water Monterey Agency. It used to be PCA, Pollution Control Agency. They've changed the concept, and the whole concept around water has been changed, and he can explain more about the name change. But Paul Sciuto is a very capable professional, and you'll like his style too.
Thanks, George. I also appreciate you throwing in more topics for me to talk about, like our name change. I had no idea I was doing that one. And it's great to see everyone here. One thing about following Jonas as a speaker is he is so good, it's a little daunting. However, this is like the first time that I've followed a speaker that I have more hair than. So I really appreciate that. So a couple months ago, George had reached out and wanted us to talk about Pure Water Monterey, the potential and feasibility of expansion. So that's pretty much what we're going to stick to. What is Pure Water Monterey? I think many of you know what it is, so we'll whip through that relatively quickly. We're going to touch on all the steps that happen to get it approved, and that goes to what both Jonas and George were talking about in that phase 2 proceeding. What did we have to do to move the ball across the finish line to be constructing as we are now? Talking about the safety of water, because that has been an issue that has come up over and over again. Certainly the current status of the project, and then finally the expansion feasibility and the report that was submitted not only to the CPUC but also to the state board. Mike McCullough with our agency will be jumping in the middle to talk about the safety of water. And just as a quick side note, our name change. Let's actually go back. So Monterey One Water. I know, microphone, I should stay over here. We used to be Monterey Regional Water Pollution Control Agency. It was a bit of a mouthful, and I know many of you have heard this joke before, but it actually is truth. I told our board that the 70s called and they wanted their name back, and we had to do something different. And as George mentioned, we're sort of changing, not just us, but the industry, the thoughts on wastewater, water in general, that it's not used water and unused water, it's just water. There's technology to clean up everything. There's a need, and it's just inserting ourselves into the water cycle. So in the water industry, there's this progressive movement of the concept of one water. So being that our agency has been recycling water for agricultural irrigation for 20 years, and now are embarking upon recycling for potable use, this seemed like an appropriate name change. And it was a lot shorter also. So what is Pure Water Monterey? It's an advanced purified recycled water project. I think many of you already know this. It's going to produce about 3,500 acre feet per year that will be injected into the Seaside Groundwater Aquifer after treatment and then extracted by CalAm for servicing all of us. It is using unutilized resources right now, meaning wastewater or other sources that are treated and disposed of in the National Marine Sanctuary. So it's truly, in our opinion, an environmentally friendly project in using an unutilized resource. Generally speaking, has a lower carbon footprint than other treatment processes. And we have a 30-year power purchase agreement with the Waste Management District to use landfill gas, renewable energy to power the recycled water facility. So, where's the water coming from? It's these source waters. Certainly, I'm not going to go in any particular order up here. The bulk of it is unused wastewater, which goes through our treatment plant, our existing treatment plant out in Marina, right next to the landfill. And will then go to the advanced water purification plant. It also includes agricultural drainage water. So crops are irrigated, water comes off that land. We're going to capture a portion of it and bring it into our plant. Agricultural wash water. You go buy your bags of lettuce at the store, pre-washed vegetables, things like that. That produces a fair amount of water each day. In the Salinas Valley, it's about 4 million gallons a day. that historically has gone just to percolation and evaporation. We're capturing that and reusing that as well. And then there's a small percentage of stormwater in this particular first phase of the project. So this gives you sort of a split of what's the percentage of water that's being used. The largest, the 16 million gallon per day, that's what MGD stands for, is the wastewater. And then you'll see that ag wash and agricultural drainage are 4 million gallon and the 3 million gallon per day, and stormwater being about 1 million. So those are the percentages when everything's put into one bucket, which it is. So when I say it's put into one bucket, what does that mean? We're not using any single source by itself. It all goes into the treatment plant, which is represented by the little black thing to the left. And it's all mixed together. It goes through our standard treatment process, which is represented by all these things from screening to secondary clarification. Once we have a Title 22 approved treated water that can be disposed of in the National Marine Sanctuary, it then goes one of three places. Either out to the bay for disposal, through our tertiary plant for agricultural irrigation, or in the future, in about a year, to our advanced water purification facility for potable recycling. So what is an advanced water purification facility? What we are building as we speak, and we actually have a demo facility that I believe many of you probably have been to, it's a four-step process. It's ozone treatment, membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, and the last step is advanced oxidation and UV disinfection. I know that's a lot of words. It is, frankly, a state-of-the-art advanced water purification facility. We've probably all heard about Orange County Water District. They actually recycle about 100 million gallons a day of wastewater for reuse. So if you've been to Disneyland, you've drank recycled water more than likely. They have 3 of these processes. So 3 barriers for purification. We've added ozone, frankly, because it's now state-of-the-art and where we're going. Because of regulations in the state of California do not allow that highly pure water to go right into our distribution system to be served to us, we're doing what's called indirect potable reuse. It's treated to an incredibly pure level, transported through a pipeline that Marina Coast Water District is currently building, is almost done with, to the Seaside Groundwater Aquifer, injected. The regulations in the state of California require that you have 6 months in the ground before that water can be taken out and served to all of us, and that's what all of our studies and models show. Actually, it shows much greater than 6 months, closer to a year. So, to the question of swapping phase 1 to phase 2, how did we get here once that happened? Because everyone in industry says, how did you guys get this done so fast? What was the driver? And frankly, the driver was the CDO, the need for water in this community, and our staff and consultants, which are the best in the industry, pushed hard. And it may seem like it took a long time to the layman, like, when you do a project around the house, I know for me, it took me about 6 years to finish my baseboards. It took less than that to get this project done. But in industry, consultants will tell you, hey, it's about 10 years to get a recycled water project done, just because of the regulatory hoops, environmental issues, and of course, design and construction. So I want to point out primarily the ones in the red up here, which were where we came to the community and there were opportunities to comment and was reviewed by those regulatory agencies of the state of California. We put out our notice of preparation saying, hey everyone, we're going to do an environmental impact report on this project. That report was certified in October of 15. As you well know, the Desal project, I believe the proposed decision yesterday said, hey, we're going to certify their EIR. Well, we did that about 3 years ago. CPUC said, hey, go ahead, Cal-Am, and negotiate a water purchase agreement. We finished that in September of 16. And then in November of 16, the Division of Drinking Water under the State Water Resources Control Board, so the group that governs all drinking water throughout the state of California, we submitted a number of reports to them saying, this is what we're going to do, here's the water we're using, here's the testing we're going to do. There was a public process to get comments that was in our boardroom, where people were able to come and talk to the members of the Division of Drinking Water, as well as submit written comments. Those were all addressed in that engineering report, and that was approved back in November of 16. Some ancillary facts. The funding for this project, actually, I'll point out Mike primarily, he pushed so hard to get 1% funding from the state. There was a small pot of money available through Proposition 1. We got 1% money for 30 years, which you can imagine how much that saved all of us. In addition, $15 million worth of grants. So money coming from the state into this community to help keep the cost of water low, as Jonas was pointing out. October last year, we started construction. I know many of you probably have been disturbed by it, whether it be the drilling out in Fort Ord, or if you go towards the landfill, we have our treatment plant being constructed. It's not disturbing anyone else other than our own employees. And the pipeline that Marina Coast is building, or almost built, from Marina into Seaside. We anticipate, is that the next slide? Nope, not at all. We anticipate the project going into testing third quarter of 2019. So let's say May, June timeframe, testing that plant, all the components will be done, we'll get it going. Water going into the ground at that point, but third quarter of 19 for CalAmbit to be able to extract and deliver, and therefore get an equivalent amount off of the Carmel River. So one thing we talk about is, where is this happening? Well, frankly, everywhere. There's over 20 permitted projects and a number of other projects that are planned in the state of California. There's more, obviously, throughout the United States and then throughout the world. Indirect potable reuse has been happening for a number of years. The biggest, obviously, is Orange County Water District. They've been doing this for 10 years. There's others that have been going on for over 20 years. So it is a proven process. It is something that, frankly, what we do well is treat water. We have certified by the state wastewater treatment plant operators that are being certified starting June of next year for an advanced water treatment certification. The reason we're waiting until June is that's the first time the state will actually offer the test and certification. So we are moving forward with all of that. With that, I'd like to, if I can figure out how to do it. Okay, I'm not going to do it because evidently I'm too old. Rachel will help me out to show a short video, about 2 minutes, on the safety of the water, and then Mike will launch into some more of the details.
There have been many studies by toxicologists, chemists, many research projects or projects that have been proposed in this country where they've done extensive work on all of the individual processes and what contaminants are removed. Some they have to seed with chemicals so they have enough concentration to monitor, measure how much is reduced. Most existing indirect potable reuse projects in California, for example, they actually do demonstration studies where they actually have pilot plants where they test the processes that are going to be used in the full plant, maybe at a smaller volume, maybe 100,000 to 1 million gallons a day facility. And they do extensive monitoring to make sure that it meets all of the drinking water standards. They look at unregulated chemicals, pharmaceuticals, endocrine disruptors to ensure that it's not at high enough levels to present a concern. So there's lots of research that's being conducted and lots of practical experience gained at the existing project.
There's been a lot of health studies in particular about the Montebello Forebay. A lot of concern about that project that began in the 60s and was spreading recycled water. And there's epidemiology studies, I believe, performed by LA County SAN. There's also been a lot of studies now funded by the Water Reuse Research Foundation to push forward sampling and data gathering from these operating facilities so that we can better understand and quantify their removals and confirm they're performing as we would anticipate. And all the results to date show that these waters are as safe or safer than the existing surface waters that these communities have available.
Potable reuse has been successfully implemented since the 70s in Southern California. There have been a number of public health studies done documenting the safety of the water and the safety of the community over that time.
Okay, so I just wanted to follow up real quick after that video to just talk about the safety of the water. And one of the things that we did at
Well, toilet tap got coined in the Potable campaign, and it was a great sound, but
Keep her around.
So one of the things we did when we knew we were going to embark on a project like groundwater replenishment is that we worked closely with the National Water Research Institute, and they developed an expert panel for us so that we could, they picked these individuals, one more slide, where they picked individuals and looked at our project in specific and said, okay, these are the professionals that we think are going to work best and analyze your proposed project. And so we had experts in hydrogeology, advanced treatment technologies that they talked about on the video, like reverse osmosis, wastewater treatment operations, and then also we had one of the panel members be a part of the Orange County process. And so they worked with us to kind of give us some insight and expertise of what we're getting ready to do into the future. And so it was really beneficial to us as a project team as we were embarking on this project to get unbiased information that people that had already been in the field learned lessons learned, and how they applied it to us. And so that was one of the things that we did early on. Another thing that as we moved through the engineering report that Paul mentioned, that the Department of Drinking Water, Division of Drinking Water approved, is that we have to really start establishing how we're going to be monitoring the water as it's going through the treatment process. And so one of the things that we have to do is now all of these plants are so, the components are electrical in nature and they're computer based, and so we have a lot of this real-time online monitoring. The other thing is that you have to do extensive water quality sampling and laboratory testing of the water prior to being injected. And we have an EPA certified lab at our facility, plus we'll probably have to send some of these samples out on a quality assurance basis out to get tested. And then also just continuing sampling of the existing water in the groundwater basin, just to show that, you know, probably improving the water quality in the basin moving forward. So, you know, as Paul mentioned, we've had some inquiries about source water evaluation, and one of the things that keeps coming up to us is that, you know, how do we know that those source waters, you know, some of the levels of some of the constituents in those waters, are they safe going into the future? And so through an extensive sampling process through those source waters, you know, the second bullet point says, yeah, a few legacy pesticides were detected. But one of the things that, you know, that's happened in technology is that the levels of detection have gone to so low levels that one of the sample legacy pesticides that was detected was lower than the drinking water levels, 45 times lower than the World Health Organization drinking water standards. And so that was one of the samples that we detected. So, you know, I think there has been some misinformation about, you know, we're going to be potentially poisoning the groundwater basin, when in fact this was the untreated water that was sampled at the source, not even before it comes in for treatment and then through advanced water treatment. So as that slide shows there, you know, almost 100% removal of these compounds. And as the gentleman in the videos highlighted, these demonstration facilities have been really helpful in monitoring these processes as they go through. We've had one and it's been really successful, and our operators have benefited greatly from learning those processes. And so as Paul mentioned earlier, what are we doing today? So this is just a schematic of the advanced water purification facility. We can show you some construction photos on the far left, the conveyance pipeline. Our partner Marina Coast has jumped in and really tackled that project with gusto, and we're probably about 90% complete with that pipeline and that project. The Blanco Drain Pump Station, that's where we'll be taking some of that agricultural drainage water. That pump station is about 50% completed. In the Seaside Groundwater Basin, where that was a monitoring well that was being drilled, that project is about 20% completed at this time. Another source water project, the reclamation ditch, it's about 25% completed. And at the advanced water purification facility out there in Marina, we're at 50% completion as we stand here today. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, and he's going to talk about the expansion.
Thanks, Mike. So that's where we're at with the project, the Pure Water Monterey Project, the first 3,500 acre feet. So one of the things George wanted me to mention is just where are we at with the expansion, what is the feasibility look like, and so on. And this is a purely, hopefully, factual discussion. We didn't initiate this, and I know Jonas was thinking we were hiding the 2,250 acre feet, under the table while we were playing poker with him. We weren't. We were truly focused on that initial project and being able to contribute to the water supply of the community. In August of 17, the CPUC issued a ruling and had a series of questions. Some of the questions had to do with Cal-Am using renewable energy, the feasibility of Marina Coast selling some of their water, and then there was two questions that were pertinent to us that, frankly, we saw as quite the curveball. It was, can pure water be expanded? And if so, how much? The reason this was a curveball is we were so focused on getting that construction you just saw, which is a $100 million project, trying to get it done in a timely fashion, that we sort of had to step back and look at the project in a different way, and we did. Our staff, our consultants did a phenomenal job in a very short period of time, producing a report that looked at 4 options. That's why you see on the second thing here it says Scenario B. We looked at 4 options on how could we get more water out of the system. And during the hearing back in, I think it was September, we sort of came to the conclusion that what was known as Scenario B was the most likely and cost-effective option if expansion were to occur. So what does that mean? Right now, after Pure Water Monterey is online producing 3,500 acre feet, there's still going to be 6,000 to 8,000 acre feet of treated water being disposed of in the bay. So that's a source that we can use to increase our production. There's also, through contracts, existing contracts with the Water Resources Agency, the ability to take another 650 acre feet during the summer months. So, and you may have heard things like, oh, the source water is not really secure. The way the expansion is being proposed and or designed, it's absolutely secure. The water's there, the water will be there. So 2250 is reliable. So what we did with our partner, Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, is said, hey, we did this amount of work in-house with some limited consultant time. It is by no means enough to show the public, the CPUC, the state board, that this is a feasible, reliable project. So the Water Management District contributed 75% of the funds, Monterey One Water another 25%. We totaled about a little under $500,000, and we hired various consultants, dedicated a ton of staff time, and between October till May, which is a very short period of time, as I mentioned, recycled water projects takes years to get done. In that short period of time, our staff and consultants got a lot of work done, and we were able to actually submit a feasibility report to the CPUC and to the state board through a submission that Jonas had done. Now, It doesn't look like much. This is just the executive summary of 41 pages. All the tech memos that supported it went through these 9 criteria. Why these 9 criteria? Going back to phase 2, when we got the first phase approved, what the CPUC said, hey, you need to look at all these items to see if it is a reasonable project to move forward. So we thought the expansion isn't part of the proceeding. We have nothing to gauge it on. So let's use what we used before and just try to fill in the data gaps. And frankly, our staffing consultants did a great job. We didn't finalize an EIR, but we identified what kind of supplement would be needed, what's the time frame, what are the costs, what are the key mitigations that would be happening. The permits, it's just more permits that we've already received. As Jonas mentioned, we're rolling. We have all the permits. We would need to modify them, absolutely. We would need to change that division of drinking water report, get another waste discharge requirement for additional injection. So there's a lot of steps to be done, but we've identified all those. And you keep going down, water quality and regulatory approvals. Everything has started, and frankly, the design, being that you have to get a reasonable amount of design done before you do all these permitting things, we're at about 30% design already with that 8 months and $500,000 worth of expenditure. Project funding, that's frankly the biggest wild card. We have, just in case, we put an application into the state for a state revolving fund loan. Unfortunately, it's not going to be 1% funds because those aren't available, but we're in the queue if and when this were to ever occur. Now, frankly, based on the proposed decision from yesterday, if the expansion doesn't go forward, we pull the application, no harm, no foul. Water purchase agreement with Cal-Am, obviously that would need the CPUC to direct Cal-Am, the Water Management District, and us to get back in a room and negotiate. Well, we have an existing one that we spent a long time negotiating. Seems like the terms and conditions would still be applicable to an additional 2,250 acre feet. And reasonableness of the project revenue requirements. We have what we know now at 30% design, what the O&M costs would be, what the debt service would be, and it's in line with that $2,000 an acre foot that Jonas had mentioned. So we certainly feel that we did, and frankly, I'm probably not part of the we, it's our staff and consultants did an incredible job showing that the project is feasible, that expansion, if need be, can be there. Now, we, Monterey One Water, would not move this thing forward without some indication from CPUC that would direct our board and or Cal-Am to get the revenue so we could move forward on the project. But the whole point of that discussion was to say, we feel that we've shown that we have a feasible project, it's secure, it's reliable, and it's basically just building on to what we have. Another thing that I've heard is, well, you guys haven't done recycled water before, maybe you should let it happen for a while. That's true. Having said that, whether we process 5 million gallons a day in our existing facility or 7 million gallons a day on the expanded version, it's not going to matter to our operators and our maintenance people and our instrumentation and electrical people. It's the same process that we can get done. So, once again, we're going to wait to see what the CPUC says. Right now, it's moving forward on the certifying the EIR, doing the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity for the Desalle plant, and that's great. We are working with Cal-Am on a brine mixing structure and having them do some outfall modifications so they can discharge their brine through our outfall. We're also working with Cal-Am on a discharge permit for that brine. So our main point is we know we need to get water supply in this community, and we're trying to help out. Source waters. I want to come back to that just because that seems to be the point that keeps coming up from everyone. That 650 acre feet is contractually obligated. It's actually been in effect since 2011. We just haven't accessed it yet. We would certainly do that for an expansion if that were to occur. And yes, we have talked to our partners in the valley. We've met with the city of Salinas, had numerous meetings and presentation with the Farm Bureau and grower shippers. So there has been an open line of communication and understanding of what this means. And then, of course, the winter months, for 20 years we've been doing our agricultural irrigation. We've always had a lot of water going out into the bay. Even after Pure Water Monterey is established and going, we're still going to have 6,000 to 8,000 acre feet going out through that outfall. So source water, certainly in our opinion, is not a limiting factor for any expansion and is absolutely secure. George, I don't know if you want to go do some final words, but thank you very much.
I just want to add a little, a few editorial remarks. The hearing next week before the PUC on this subject was asked for by the PUC. It was not originated by local advocates of any kind, project advocates like us, ratepayers, or whatever. The PUC initiated the question, are there alternative projects you can create locally out of existing sources? And they didn't say why they wanted to look at that. It was never clear why they asked that question. This question was asked 6-8 months ago. The assumption is they also thought the project might be litigated and delayed, and therefore our community is stuck without a water project, or at least it's stalled. And the reason I keep calling this a Plan B is that it is the bailout position to get out from under the CDO and to make sure we have a water supply coming online with a targeted date. Because if Cal-Am's project is litigated and it comes to a halt, there is no target, there are still moratoriums under the CDO. We don't know how much it's going to cost and ultimately how much Cal-Am might bill us for whatever it happens, a litigation, project, or both, or none. All those are questions up in the air. And yet the community has been demanding a water supply for years and years and years. And let me tell you one other thing about Cal-Am. They have refused to endorse a Plan B. And when asked, do they have a Plan B, they said, we're going to run this track through the PUC, period. No Plan B, no discussion, no options, no suggestions, no encouragement that there's going to be an answer at the end of that track. So from my standpoint, and I think from the community standpoint too, when this whatever happens, if there is no Plan B getting close to being recognized, we're still stuck with no water. And the conclusion that everybody wants is, the result is, let's get a water supply. So I think this is an enormously valuable time, important time, to find out whether our community is going to have a Plan B, or whether Cal-Am is going to bulldoze itself to get into a position where it's litigated and everything comes to a stop. And nobody knows what happens next. Nobody knows, except the State Water Resources Control Board still has a CDO in place, the moratorium will still continue, and we're going to be frustrated about what we do next. I want to put in a plug for public partnerships. One reason, the 3,500 acre feet and the quick ability to generate a plan around 2,200 acre feet of this project. One reason why is that all of the public agencies, water public agencies on the peninsula have cooperated in making it happen. It's Marina Coast, it's Pure Water Monterey, or Monterey One Water, and it's the Water Management District. Cal-Am doesn't have a hand in this project, except to buy the water delivered. It's been publicly financed, publicly planned, put on a priority list, the issues have been worked out, and this is where we are. We have the potential that this can be a salvation for this community. At least it can be a holding pattern with water until a larger supply issue gets resolved. But if we stay on the track we're on, you will be without water, we'll all be with a huge frustration level, and it's going to be the attorneys that sort this out. Not the community, not the public agencies, not the elected officials, the attorneys. We can do better than that. And I'm convinced we can. But I do want Q&A time. So, I'm going to ask, how does it go? Who wants questions? Who wants, and there are mics, but if you have a big voice, feel free to go that way. But I'm going to ask you two to come up here, please, and not me, run the show. Jonas and Paul.
Oh, we're running right now.
Yeah, we're going to run. So go ahead. Okay, here. Go ahead, yes, ask the question.
Can you compare the amount of energy needed for the recycled water process to the amount of energy needed for desal, either full salinity seawater or slightly brackish water?
So I don't know if everyone heard the question. I'm going to paraphrase if that's okay. What's the difference, what's the energy requirements for desal versus recycled water? And I think the caveat was not just desal of ocean water, but maybe brackish water and other things. So ballpark, and certainly Cal-Am can chime in as well, from an ocean water to recycled water, it's about 4 times more energy for desal. And the reason being, there's more stuff in the ocean water. You have a lot of salts in there. So the TDS is about 30,000 parts per million. We're down like in the 5,000s. Now, that's a ballpark. In terms of having it be exact, it depends on the water, just like you said. Briny, just that you get in some of the aquifers near the ocean, would be far less energy intensive than true seawater. Does that answer your question?
Let me add to that. You all seem like a pretty smart group. My wife and I live in the foothills of California, that urban forestry interface. So you're asking about energy that relates back to greenhouse gases, that relate to what we see on our TV if you're in the Central Valley, the air quality, the fire risk to everybody. And so what are we doing as a society when we have a choice between, you know, something that uses a lot more energy? And in this case with Pure Water Monterey, they've secured the ability to use gas from the wastewater processes or the waste processes. So, you know, the advantages as a society, what are we thinking here?
Question over there, we'll go back.
Paul, I have one question before I get this mic up. Did I get that clear that the water that you're going to put into the Seaside Groundwater Basin is actually cleaner than the water that already is in the basin?
Is that what you said, Mike? Yeah, so I thought.
It sounded like it.
Well, actually, yeah. So when you look what comes out of the Advanced Water Purification Facility, and those of you that have been there, we actually have to add calcium back in the water because it's too pure. So when you taste the non-stabilized version, it doesn't taste very good. So I think actually what you're pointing out, Mel, is a slide that says we're going to look at the improved water qualities in the Seaside Basin after we put in. That's the case.
Got a question for Jonas. Jonas, you had said that you let Cal-Am take extra water out of the river because the community needed it. And to me, that sounds like somebody robbing a bank and taking the money and saying, my family needs it. They can return the money, but Cal-Am can't return the water. So why wasn't Cal-Am punished? Why weren't the people in charge of Cal-Am ever sent to jail? If you and I went down there with a truck and tried to get, and just loaded up a truck with water, we'd have to go to jail. And yet they got away with it. That's really highway robbery.
Or riverway robbery, I suppose. Yeah, you might consider it as. Yes, we actually initiated the extension of time, and it wasn't just a get out of jail for a while free pass. It was tied specifically to the progress on the water recycling project. And because that was going to so significantly reduce the illegal diversions, we felt that in the balance of things, not punishing this community when they're making significant progress is worth it. And we're fish lovers. I mean, my license plate says Save Rivers. So I'm not cutting Cal-Am any slack. on this, but sometimes you have to just, how would I say, be practical about it. Yes, we might want to push harder and harder and harder, certainly, whenever we can, we do, but you want to get to the end point as fast as you can. And sometimes jamming things, like I think the PUC judges are doing, they're trying to jam this right now to meet a deadline. I understand that, but it's going to extend things. No one will go to jail, it's just going to delay things if the commission adopts the proposed decision. Sometimes you just got to do your best.
This question's for Paul Sciuto. Based upon the needs of the community, water demand, does your expansion project, is it intended to supplement the Desalle plant, or does it replace the Desalle plant, or the need for a Desalle plant?
Thanks, Paul. So first, let me say one thing. I almost feel bad about throwing an egg at that car that said fish lover on it. So, anyhow, so I think consistently what we have said at Monterey One Water is we are helping the solution. My personal belief is there needs to be an additional water source, absolutely. When you look at the demand scenarios that were presented to the CPUC, and I'm going to try to quote them, I apologize if I'm a little wrong. In September of 17, the Water Management District said, hey, for the future growth and build out, we need about, I think it was 12,156 acre feet. And then the CalAm testimony showed, I think, 14,000 acre feet. You know, we can add it up, Paul. When you look at what they can legally take, CalAm can legally take from the river, Seaside Basin, the Sand City Desal plant, our 3,500 aquifer storage and recovery, I think that only adds up to about 8,700 acre feet. So we are not in the demand projection business. So when I look at Water Management District saying over 12,000, CalAm saying over 14,000, I certainly know that if we come up with another 2,250, that's only a little over 11,000 acre feet. That does not meet the long-term demand. So we've always said that we will complement additional water supplies like a desal plant.
I'm Edward Olson. I'm wondering, originally I thought that the recycled water actually would be recycled from sewage. And I would like to comment as to, is that a possibility in the future?
So it is being recycled from wastewater. So my understanding of the question is you thought that the recycled water was being recycled from wastewater.
Right.
It is. So there's...
Well, wastewater from sewage is different than wastewater from agriculture.
Correct. I don't know how many slides back this is.
Up to 2/3.
Yeah. Sorry. So what you see there is the dark blue, the big chunk. About 2/3, as Jonas just mentioned, is from wastewater, from standard domestic wastewater. The agricultural wash water and agricultural drainage water represent about, what is that? 29% and another 1% from, well actually, I'm sorry, 16% from agricultural drainage, 17% from ag wash, and about 2/3 from standard wastewater.
Okay, what I'm observing is actually as you increase the water use in the Monterey Peninsula, the wastewater increases.
Correct.
So you actually, there's a source that's not discussed, which is going to be there in the future for expansion.
You're right.
As you expand, you get more water, more wastewater.
Correct. If I can just, you're absolutely right, there would be more water available. Now, as I think Mike mentioned, this project's been great because we have so many partners. Well, along with those partners, there's a number of contractual agreements back and forth. With the Water Resources Agency, they are entitled to agricultural irrigation water during the growing months as much as they want. So even if there's an expansion, they get that additional water that is from our service area. But what you've identified is in the winter months, the non-growing seasons, there'd be more water for recycling. You're absolutely right. Yeah, so George just asked if I would comment on the effect of conservation to our treatment plant. And it's been tremendous. As Jonas mentioned, we've done a great job as a community driving down the gallons per capita per day that we all use. Now, what does that do to a wastewater treatment plant like ours? We were, let's say about 6 years ago, we were at about 21 million gallons a day. Every day flowing through our plant on average. Now, we're somewhere between 17 to 18 million gallons per day. So, we all conserve less water to the treatment plant. Of course, I can go into all sorts of other issues, but in reference to recycling, it's less water for recycling. But we are still continuing to recycle almost 100% of it during the growing months to the agricultural irrigation in the Castroville area, and we have the other available for recycling for potable use.
Oh, could you go forward one slide? One way?
Yeah, just, it's sort of interesting because I worked on both desal and recycling. That's pretty similar to the same treatment train for ocean desal. It's the same equipment, it's the same processes, by and large, yeah. So, what people think of sometimes, here we've got this wastewater. It's treated through, all the way through secondary. Then we dump it in the ocean. Then we pull it back out and treat it again. Just saying.
I haven't heard you speak before, either of you, and George, I'll include in this too. I'm so glad you're not working for Cal-Am. and some of this information would be so great if it were in the newspapers, or I don't know how expensive it is to get it out there, but I know most people just read those flyers that Cal-Am's going to start sending out every day. And they just get sick of information and they don't realize they're not hearing both sides. So just as far as, you know, the Public Water Now initiative.
I'm just curious, what kind of, how are you treating the byproducts or the waste from this process? Where is it going?
So, a couple ways. Through where it says secondary clarification, what comes out, well, there's a bunch of stuff that comes out, obviously. We call biosolids. Some people might call it sludge, whatever you want to call it. It's organic material, and we dry it in beds so it gets up to about 50% solids. Even though that sounds like it's squishy, much of the water is intercellular, so it looks like dry dirt, and we haul it to the landfill. So it goes right next door to the landfill in lined landfill cells. Now, once we have the advanced water purification facility online, on the reverse osmosis membranes, just like Cal-Am's going to have, you have to backwash those things. So what comes off of those is a RO, or reverse osmosis concentrate. Basically, you're blowing off all the sort of nasty stuff that's caught in these very fine filters. That will actually go through our outfall and discharged into the National Marine Sanctuary. That's one of the things that most people are like, ooh, you're going to get rid of all that stuff to the ocean. But that's why we're doing so much work on a hydraulic modeling perspective, making sure we are compliant with all aspects of the California Ocean Plan, which, as everyone in this room probably knows, is really stringent. So under all conditions, whether there's wastewater going out plus a concentrate, just concentrate, or brine from Cal-Am, we will be compliant from a dispersion and dilution perspective in our outfall. So if I can talk about the outfall for a second. When I say outfall, people say, oh, there's probably a pipe that's going on the beach. That's not the case. It's actually 5 miles from our treatment plant, about 2 miles out into the National Marine Sanctuary at about 100 feet deep. Over the last 1,000 feet of that, there are ports on either side. Like if you're looking at it from a clock, 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So that concentrate, or the waste, is dispersed over that 1,000 feet and dispersed throughout the water column. But it does meet the California Ocean Plan, and in theory, if we can get through the regulatory hoops, we'll go to the regional board meeting in November for approval.
Dennis, and then over here in the back.
Thank you. So, Paul, this is, as you know, I'm a big fan of the One Water Project. I spent 4 or 5 years helping negotiate with the farmers over the use of the water. But I think the one thing that I'm missing here in tonight's discussion is there's no talk about, or inadequate discussion about the effect of, number one, the prolonged droughts that we're probably going to be exposed to, which will significantly cut down on the water that's available for the fish coming down, going up and back and forth on the Carmel River. And there may be even future pressure to cut back on the amount of water that can be taken out of the Carmel River down below what it is now. So that's a real factor. The other factor is that there are other uses for water currently flowing to the treatment facility, as exampled by the City of Pacific Grove diverting water to be used that had been flowing as effluent up to the facility is now being used to water the golf course and the cemetery, perhaps. So, you know, those kinds of demands for water are going to increase, and I fear that there will be a decreasing amount of water. And also, I haven't mentioned that we are highly dependent on water from the Salinas Valley. We are highly dependent on that. And that whole question about how that water is going to be available to be for use in the future is obviously up in the hands of Gary Peterson and that whole group of people that are trying to work out how do you manage the groundwater in the Salinas Valley. So I think when we stay focused on treating that effluent and other sources of impaired water for our future, we may be short-circuiting ourselves or short-sighted about why we have to have another source of water. Now, we may be able, in my opinion, we may be able to stave that off until we come up with a more regional Desalle project. And that might be the solution rather than having Callahan build a very expensive plant. As pointed out, $7,000 an acre foot is probably realistic. So that's one thing I'd like to have a little more addressed is the impact of drought, which we know will happen again, and the impact of the Salinas Valley negotiations over what to do with the groundwater. Thank you.
Hey, next time could you make it a more complex question? So let me address the Pacific Grove plant, which is great. It's coming on, it's online, it's used to irrigate the golf course and the cemetery. You know, we're talking 3,500 acre feet, an initial if expansion, 2,250 acre feet. Callahan's Desal, I think, is in the 6,900 acre feet. The PG plant, it's taking about 85 acre feet per year. So in the grand scheme of things, it isn't that impactful. Now, how many of those sort of plants are going to pop up around the area? You don't know. You don't know in 30 years, you're right. But there's a reason that when MRWPCA came into existence, there was a number of small plants. And there was centralization because of economies of scale, because of environmental effects and so on. So personal opinion is we're not going to see a bunch of these plants popping up, and even if we do, the effects of 85 acre feet over a year is relatively small. In terms of, as you mentioned, Gary Peterson and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, that is a huge wild card. That groundwater basin is in deficit, meaning they're taking more out than is coming in each year. That you're starting to see, starting since like 50s, I guess, see seawater intrusion. Generally speaking, we aren't accepting any groundwater from them, so solutions to the groundwater issue and where that's going would not affect our flows necessarily to our plant. I certainly feel that we, Monterey One Water, would be in a position to help out the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, whether it be with river flows or whatever it may be, where we're geographically situated, and frankly what our expertise is in our staff. I think the last thing you mentioned was we're going to hit drought. Yeah, we are. We absolutely are. And I think that last 4-year drought was a fairly historical drought. Our numbers dropped down. I mentioned it went from 21 million gallons a day down to 17 million gallons a day. So that's the effect of droughts. Are we going to see them in the future? Yeah, we will. I think the gentleman that said more people come in, more wastewater produced, yeah, we're going to see some fluctuations in the flows at the plant, but I think that's generally attenuated over the long run. Maybe just to reiterate, we aren't standing here saying we want to recycle 10,000 acre feet or anything else. We're just saying what we feel is possible and offering solutions if and when they're needed. We are certainly looking out the long term, meaning 30 years plus, because that's the term of our loans that we're obligated to. And we've worked with the Water Resources Agency, looking at historical data and trying to project into the future as best we can on what the maximum amount they would need for agricultural irrigation when a drought occurs. So we've tried to be conservative in understanding what those flows are. You know, the crystal ball gets fuzzy a few years out though. So I don't know if that answered your questions or at least addressed them somewhat, Dennis.
You addressed it. Before we go here, I want to add one other comment that the long-term future of this community, as far as most of us are concerned, we're going to need desal. And regardless of whether it's large or small amount of growth and whatever the uses are and whatever the resources and whatever the capacity of various source waters are, I think in the long run we're going to need desal. But I think we need a desal that's in partnership with the public agencies that exist and with a regional approach to the supply issue, because it's not just the peninsula, it's not the only one that needs water. And the project that's now being proposed by Cal-Am threatens another community. That's not making community work. But if we had a larger concept, just like was mentioned, if it was regional and if it were partnered for the future and for the long-term future, we could have a wonderful project. And it would probably be desal. I mean, it would be desal. But we're not there yet. Question here?
Yes, speaking of desal plant, Cal-Am is proposing... Cal-Am is proposing a desal plant, and I understand that it's using technology, or is planning to use technology that is not being used anywhere else in the world for a desal plant. Is that true? And it's not tested that it's going to be working, and why is not using the same approach as all the other desal plants? They are working and they're working well.
Well, I just want to clarify one thing. I think all the technology being proposed for desal is used worldwide, and all navies in the world use desal plants. It's the slant well itself. It's the technology of how you get the water. It's the intake. That's the part that's never been proven. It doesn't exist anywhere. This is an experimental project, and there's some unknowns about it, some serious unknowns.
So why
but that's the only piece.
But why would they use the slant type versus the normal way? I mean, is there any reason why they have to go to this new process?
Well, I'm going to ask, because there's states involved.
So for the kinds of desal plants you read about in the Middle East, for instance, where they do a lot of it, the way they get the water into the plant is just an open pipe. It's a pipe. But for some reason, people don't want to see an open pipe in the sanctuary sucking in all the fish. So the idea was to do a subsurface intake so that the fish would not be sucked in, or even if they had screens, impaled on those screens. So the idea for the subsurface is that you let the water trickle in through the sand and it doesn't trap the fish. Now, there are intakes in rivers that use that technology. I'm not familiar with intakes in the ocean. Another reason is you have to have it out under the ocean some distance to keep from sucking in groundwater from the Salinas Basin. That's of concern to the people in Marina. There are experts who believe that there will be no interaction, that even though you have these wells there, it won't suck in groundwater and it won't move the ocean water towards the Marina's aquifer. There are other experts, also very qualified, who believe there is a significant risk. It's an unknown. A problem is, and I don't know which is right, whether it really would harm that aquifer, but if you screw up the aquifer, it's pretty tough to fix it. So that's a risk associated with that.
So isn't that a very good reason not to use that approach? Because the risks are enormous and they're also very expensive?
Well, I think it gets into the weighing of everything. There are risks for droughts, a risk for everything else, but that is one risk. When you have an alternative that costs about a third, doesn't use as much energy for global climate change, that builds on a project that's already underway, it isn't going to get litigated. When you put all those together and weigh that, for us, we lean towards the expansion. As Paul and others have said, maybe at some time in the future, you do need a regional water supply project. That would be a different project.
Well, I'm all for the regional Desal plan, but I'm also so much in favor of this recovery or recycling water, because it's the best alternative that I see. So why do we allow CalAm to proceed with a slant plant, desalination plant, that there is a lot of risks and a lot of it expensive?
As a party to that proceeding, I am not allowed to advise people how to advocate before them. I can tell you that you have the opportunity to do it. You can express whatever view you would like. And I'm glad that's being taped in case somebody from the CPUC asks us. Thank you. I looked over there and went, oh my God. I don't have to have a little microphone in my pen.
Thank you so much for your work. I hope that you could get the extension as well.
Let me just address real quick the slant well. My understanding is it's not CalAm's choice to do the slant well. It was mandated by the regulatory agencies because they don't want to be sucking fish through an open ocean intake.
Right.
So it was mandated by the regulatory agencies, and they said, CalAm, you need to try this. And it hasn't been used, but that's why there's a test slant well that has been operating for 2+ years. And they're constantly testing it to make sure it will work if and when it goes to full scale.
But the rest of the picture on the slant well being experimental and not proven, the intention and the language for the slant well and the documentation or the regulations at the state level made the assumption that the intakes of the slant well would be under the ocean, under the bay, under the saltwater volume. That was the assumption. The project, I mean, the regulations were written around that. And then CalAm has, because of some regulatory issues they had, the intake is not under the ocean, it's mostly under land. That's the dilemma. Under the ocean, that's what everybody thought would work. Since the intake is actually inland, it's engaged all the water rights issues that come into play. It's engaged the water supply of Marina. That's where the litigation seems to be coming from. So what was intended in the front end seemed to be attractive. What has actually happened has created an enormous series of problems. And and what's happening today is not consistent with the way the regulations are written. Oh no, I'm sorry, you're next.
Love the creative solutions, and I'm grateful that we're pursuing this locally. Has any thought been given to the sludge and perhaps harvesting methane or any of the off-gassing from that process to provide energy to power the process and reducing our carbon footprint at all? Is that feasible?
People are going to think I planted you here. Yeah, so for years our plant has what are known as digesters. We have 4 digesters that all the biosolids go into, produce methane, and we have 3 cogeneration engines that produce energy for the treatment plant. We've been doing that for years. You know, it's a difficult process, particularly as old as our plant is, but we produce about 95% of our energy already. When I say that we're going to use, oh yeah, go ahead and clap. Sorry, you're right. My notes said wait for applause. So, when I say that we negotiated with the Waste Management District for their landfill gas renewable energy, it was because we use all ours for our existing treatment plant, the screening through secondary clarification. When we add the advanced water purification facility, we need more power. So that's why we went to our neighbors next door. So we are absolutely doing that.
Question for Jonas. Can you speak to the demand numbers? I think there was a Monterey Peninsula Water Management District number of about 12,000, Cal-Am of about 14,000. What are the assumptions underlying those? And most importantly, why was deference given to Cal-Am and not to the Water Management District in those proceedings?
So there's a range of numbers. You all have been using about 9,500 acre feet per year for some time. It used to be much higher, used to be up around 14,000. But for a variety of reasons we discussed earlier, that demand has gone down. Good for you. There are several reasons for the difference. The hospitality industry thinks that there's going to be a major bounce back in demand associated with an improved economy at the, all the great facilities you have here. We would note that that economic recovery has been underway for a couple of years. We've not seen that bounce back. I would be kind of surprised if any of the hotels that paid to put in the highly efficient toilets say, oh my gosh, we've got a desal plant, now we can rip those out and start using more water. That seems counterintuitive to me. They also anticipate that you as customers are going to significantly, I think 30% increase your per capita water use. Probably because the water is so wonderful and invaluable that you're paying so much that you'll want to use even more of it. I cannot follow that logic. There were experts at the PUC that testified about price elasticity. You have some of the highest rates in the country already. You already have some of the highest rates. Now you roll in his 2,000 acre feet of water. Wait for the applause.
Yeah, thanks.
Talk about my hair. You roll that in, and your rates are going to go up, and then bump it up to 7,500. You still have to pay that 2,000, and then bump it up to 7,500 dollars per acre foot for about 8,000 acre feet or whatever it is more. And their assumption that the CPUC bought was that, yeah, that was a reasonable demand numbers. I started doing demand estimates for the state back in 1978, and the history has been that water agencies, remember I was a water agency manager, I did that sort of thing, and the way we would project water rates was like this. You could look at econometric models, you could look at demographics, or you could get your ruler and go, here we are, and there's where it's going to be. And by and large, that's what they've done. And I cannot find contemporary analysis that supports their findings. Now, why would the CPUC do that? The CPUC regulates a whole lot of things. They do your cell phone coverage. They do, the big ticket is, of course, energy, right? PG&E, the fires, multi-billion dollar things. They do railroads, they do limousine services and so forth. This is not an area of expertise for them. Most of the water in California is delivered through public water agencies, and so the amount of attention and expertise they have within the CPUC for water is just a fraction of what they would have for energy. There is no way that the PUC would accept those kinds of demand estimates for energy, because they're in it every day and they follow it and they understand price elasticity. That knowledge did not carry over to water.
I would just like to say...
Just a second, if you would. I just want to piggyback on the one thought that the initiative in Measure J is to change the structure of how we deal with water. because the PUC is part of the structure of how we deal with it. It's a narrow track, they deal in silos, the broader community's never existed, is never considered, the broader partnership potential is never considered. It's hard for public agencies in general, and the question was about where the Water Management District, where's their voice, or why isn't the PUC hearing, listening to their voice? The PUC is not used to hearing the public, at least in some substantive way. They're not used to public agencies in general. So it's kind of a shadow you're fighting up there. You're fighting procedures. It's how hard it is to even get your material filed. So it's a structural issue that we have on this peninsula, and it's one that we don't talk enough about. But we think public ownership is still the way to go. The best structure anyway, and the way to go.
I was fortunate enough to work on the board for PCA for 8 years, and I've heard lots and lots of presentations. This is the best one I've ever heard. And one of the reasons is the overall perspective that you brought to us from out of the area. You were looking at it from such a broad view, and I really appreciate that and appreciate what you've had to say, because we have had our struggles with the people in San Francisco and making decisions. I would also like to say that I applaud Paul Sciuto and his staff, who have done a fantastic job in increasing the amount of water that this peninsula can now survive on until down the road, when probably more is going to be needed from another Desal regional plant. So I just say thank you so much for your dedication, your work.
We're going to wrap up Q&A in just a few minutes, so if you are interested in having a question, please show yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious about, there's something called Deep Water Desal in Moss Landing. I'm just wondering, where does that project stand at this point? And I heard that they're doing an intake that doesn't quite hurt the environment as much. And how would that work with our regional solution in terms of possibilities for the future, rather than the Cal-Am Desal plant?
I think nobody standing up here has the position to comment intelligently on that question.
I do.
He said intelligently.
You may recall that, or may not, I did actually chair the state's desalination task force, and that project ain't never going to happen. You don't get an unscreened open intake, a new one in California. It's never going to happen. It just ain't going to happen. They have a theory that, oh, they're going to put the pipe way down deep, right? Where there aren't any fish. Huh? You know, I have negotiated over $1 billion of water projects that have been built. You got to kind of step back sometimes and say, is this a wacky idea? And it is. Sorry, I mean, that's just, the permitting for it is just not going to happen. It's super hard to get any desalination project built in California. There's one in Southern California, there might be two. They're hooking into existing systems. Nobody is proposing a new one. Sorry, they just don't have the chops to pull that one off.
Okay, I'm Susie Wister, and my question, and maybe, I don't know if you can answer this, but as we talk down the road about additional supply, the fact that we can't take water, we can't directly use, without a creative name for recycled water, but you know, we can't directly use that water, we have to pump it back into groundwater. And we also can't directly use or replumb our houses for gray water. So these are ways that we could, one, get the other water faster and not have waste time and money and additional electrical use by not having to repump the water up and down and refilter it again. And also, if we could be doing much more gray water and all of us individually doing that, we could be saving water internally and using it more efficiently. So these are other things we could do, but it seems like at a state level, are there people working on a state level to make this possible so that we could do a better job of reducing that 9,000 acre feet that we're all using right now?
Let me start.
The Plant Conservation League where I work, we sponsored the legislation that is now law, it did a couple of things. It required the state to come up with safe standards for injecting recycled water into aquifers. So that allows One Water Monterey to know what the rules are. Another step that, well, let me go back. Our first criterion is safety, public safety first, last, and always. Even if it's a cheaper supply, if it cannot have assurances of total public safety, hell no. So with that, in that legislation, the state was required to do a study to see if it might be possible to develop safety standards for direct potable reuse. And that's taking it from an advanced water purification facility, hooking it flange to flange, plumbing terms, pipe to pipe. And they're looking at that. But that isn't a settled thing, because you don't have what's called the safety buffer, putting it in the ground in case, heaven forbid, something goes wrong. Maybe at some point we will get there, but just like with every other step of water recycling for human use, safety is first, and if that happens, it would save money, that'd be a great idea, but we're not there yet.
And maybe a related piece is, if we didn't dump so much stuff into our water, whether that's on an ag field or in our own home products, we can buy all kinds of stuff that are terrible and dump them down the drain. And people think they're good, and if we actually regulate it, it was just in Thailand, and they won't let you put a lot of stuff into the water. I mean, we could make it really simple so that not so much stuff goes into the waste treatment. I'm like, gosh, these guys are really on this. This makes a whole lot of sense. And I just thought, why are we just saying, oh, it's, you know, free will, we can buy anything and dump anything? So I just threw that out. That's part of the problem. Whatever you dump, you got to clean. Sorry.
No, you're right. What comes to us, we have to clean. And we have 275,000 customers. And to get everyone to shift the way they look to, it would certainly change the demand and loading at our treatment plant. And our operators do a great job adjusting that sort of stuff. But that's, not to be cynical, but to get that done for the entire community and change that mindset, I think would be really difficult in a long time.
Well,
now,
education.
And you're right, outreach and education, and we do that, Water Management District does that, Marina Coast, on a variety of sources. I want to touch on the direct potable reuse. Yeah. So the video you saw, the first gentleman that was talking was James Crook, PhD. He was on the panel of, I think, 4 or 5 experts in the state that came up with those draft regulations that were produced last year for one way to go about direct potable reuse. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon, meaning 3, 5, who knows how many years, but that's where the industry is going. But we're sitting here, we're producing water next year, and there's no regulations that allow with a flange to flange, so that's why we're doing the injection wells, and CalAm will be extracted.
Let me add one more thing. Let's assume that all of you good people took a pledge and said, I'm never going to use any whatever the stuff is, okay? And I'm not going to dump it in the drain. That would not change one step or one protection that will be necessary. We don't count on people's goodwill or their good practice. This is for natural and man-induced chemicals or substances, so the protections to public safety have to be there, not relying on practice.
Well, true.
Yeah. It would be nice, but, and we should be dumping stuff down there.
First, I didn't realize until tonight the great love between Paul and Jonas, and I thank you for that. I know both of you have talked about the demand needs on the peninsula for water, and you've illuminated some very important points. And you know, there are significant discrepancies, if you will, and certainly the cost of that, of meeting those demand needs is important. But since a lot of the water that's coming from the slant well, significant amount, is coming from the groundwater in the Marina Coast Water District or the Salinas Valley Basin, which is one of California's already critically identified overdrafted basins in California, are you aware of the demand needs within that jurisdictional basin and the demand needs for water there?
I'm not. I mean, the question is when you suck the water out,
with slant wells, even though they're partially under the ocean, but not entirely under the ocean, if you start taking some of that aquifer supply, what Cal Am has said is, well, they're going to be able to tell when they pump the water, based largely on how much salt is in there. If it's really, really salty, like 30,000, 33,000 parts per million salt, then they know that's ocean water. If it's less salty, they say, oh, well, we know where that came from. That came from a brackish or freshwater aquifer. And they've said that, okay, any water that they detect, they say it's, I think they're saying 7%. They're assuming it's going to be 7% of water from the aquifer, which also part of Marina's supply. Then they will replace that water. They'll take some of the desalted water and put that back into that aquifer. They'll inject it or trade it with somebody else so that they don't pump that water. That number is an estimate at this time. It's water that you ratepayers are going to be paying for. You know, it's even though you're not going to use it, that's if they have to do 1,000 acre feet of that at 7,500 acre feet, you don't get to drink that water. It's going back into that other basin, but you will pay for it.
And where it's going is not in the Marina Coast Water District jurisdiction. It's over in Moss Landing. And also, as you say, the Peninsula folks will be paying for that return water, and Marina doesn't get any of the water that's being pumped from the groundwater. So there are a lot of issues with this.
There's even a big social justice issue here. And some of you look like you might be liberals. I'm just looking. And here's the deal. You're all, how many of you live in Monterey? Or PG, Carmel? How many in Marina or Salinas? Okay, so the benefit of this is going to the Peninsula, right? The facility would be in Marina. How would you guys like an industrial facility on the beach in Monterey or Asilomar to serve a different community? You know, and if you've been over there, it's kind of by the sand plant, and we know the sand plant's going away, right? So it's a great opportunity for that area that is perhaps not as affluent, but to have a kind of an ocean amenity such as the rest of you enjoy. But that opportunity is going to be somewhat diminished by having that industrial facility there. Are we getting a picture of why the Marina people are getting pissed? Might hurt their groundwater supply, and somebody's going to have an industrial facility to serve somebody else. I think they're going to sue.
Thank you, Jonas.
Just wondering if Mr. Sciuto could comment briefly on the stormwater treatment of current urban runoff during the winter, if that's going to be diverted for also for recyclable purposes.
So a portion absolutely is. And you hit a nail on the head with stormwater. It's sort of the holy grail of reuse, because it just does all sorts of bad things. It is wasted. It takes those pollutants that are on the roadways and elsewhere and takes them out to waterways. So as part of the project, the one that we're currently building, there's a small percentage of the city of Salinas stormwater that we would be taking into our system, obviously cleaning up and reusing. Outside of this project, just what we've been doing, sort of like the energy generation, in Pacific Grove, a number of their stormwater facilities do flow into our pump stations, our wastewater pump stations. We have the ability to shut those off, because last thing you want is a wastewater overflow because of stormwater. But before flows come up, we have capacity in our system where we can take some of that stormwater, we can take that pollutant load out of the environment, and there is that partnership with Pacific Grove. We're also investigating that with City of Monterey, and to a lesser degree, at least right now, the City of Seaside. So that's something that we have our eye on, not just for a water reuse perspective, but from a community perspective, it makes sense to do, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
So
this will be the last question.
If you think it's a no-go for a direct pipe for Desalle, what's the alternative? If we're going to need a Desalle plant, is it going to be slant wells? Or what? There's a big plant, Del Mar, operating, big plants in Australia operating direct pipe. Well, you know, is there no way to access ocean water? Or what?
Some of that's a question of when you need it, and do you start paying for facilities way before you need them at those high costs? You know, if you're going to build a desal plant, it's going to cost you megabucks, right? But let's assume you do need at some point. Do you start paying now for a project that might not be used for 10, 15, or 20 years? Do you start paying for it? These aren't bonds or something else. This is, I mean, they're bonds, but you're the ratepayers who have to pay them. What do you do though past that if you do need facilities? That's actually a question. Unlike some of the others that he gave me. The advantages of a regional project is that there's regional sharing of benefits, and that means that when there are costs, dollar costs, or cost to our community of siting a facility, if that community is getting some benefits, it's a lot easier to swallow, recycled water joke there, than it is if all the benefits going someplace else. So one of the things that I hope comes out of this is that you come up with some short-term solutions. You expand Pure Water Monterey. But as a community, you don't say, well, we're going to have winners and losers. It's Marina, the city of Marina, those folks against the people on Peninsula. It's that you come together. We have a discourse that's different than we're seeing in Washington at the national level with alternate facts and whatnot. I was involved in a project, it took us 7 years, but we came up with a 30-year agreement with over $500 million of new projects and increasing flows for the fish on the river, and it included groundwater management, and it included a whole bunch of things. When people came together kind of as equals, not as those who have something and maybe have some resources to pursue it, be they public or private entities, and did it much more collegially. I think that's the solution. I think there are possibilities, but not on the track that people are currently pursuing. Thank you.
I want to make just a couple of comments. One is, the reason I asked Paul to describe his name change is I have this image of racial profiling. This is water profiling, because his name had wastewater and pollution and all that conceptual identity of water. Water is a fantastic resource. That's why they changed their name, is to recognize the growing value of any water. Anyway, so bad profiling in the past. The impact on marina, and there's several comments, questions related to that. The impact on marina was never looked at by CalAM's project, and there's nothing in the EIR about the impact on marina. They're totally ignored. And there's a huge hole in the EIR because of that, which is another reason why it might be litigated. My other question on the water that's taken out, that's fresh water that's got to stay in the basin or goes to Castroville, it's like we're on a peninsula, we buy a dozen eggs. But we're going to give one of those eggs to somebody who's in Salinas, say, somewhere outside of our area. But we're going to pay for that egg anyway because we need 11. But we're paying for 12. We don't get 12. We only get 11. That's the problem of the problem of the project now, that's trying to take water underground. Anyway, it's going to be litigated. That's another part of the litigation. What I want to add, what I want to remind you is this little alert, is that you have an opportunity, you have a right to make your opinions known to the public utility commissioners, the commissioners themselves. I hope you take advantage of that. And the last thing I want to say is that on your way out, please, those who can and are willing to, sign up for Public Water Now emails or whatever, however we can get in touch with you, because we We still have a campaign to run through the first week in November, and I want to thank our two speakers enormously.